Hello and welcome to Movie Town, the Los Angeles Revival Cinema Scene show, here to dive deep into the April Revival Cinema Scene recs. So let's jump right in. And April's, the lead on April isn't that different than February and March. And I feel like we have to start with the new Beverly. And specifically, the New Beverly William Beaudine Retrospective. If you haven't listened to the Pure Cinema podcast, they have a two-part incredible, almost 5-hour podcast with Quentin Tarantino, of course, the owner of the New Beverly, and who is responsible for this William Beaudine Retrospective. This is a director who's working in silence through the 50s and, has this reputation of nickname as one-shot William Beaudine because he could shoot a movie so fast, and it was a little bit kind of a negative connotation to that he didn't have as much craft, and he, shot over 100 movies, directed over 100 movies, and Tarantino feels like he has unearthed a really important American director from classic Hollywood. And so he's giving William Beaudine his due. And I'm guessing many of you, like me, have never heard of William Beaudine. I had barely even heard of any films that they're showing in this. He's possibly most well known for directing 25 of the 40 Bowery Boys films, which were this kind of group. They weren't kids by the time he was working with them. They were 20, in their 20s and 30, and it was a group of actors that came up in New York City really as kids to star in a Broadway play called The Dead End Kids, and then that got turned into the East End Kids and then into the Bowery Boys. And it's a very like slapstick New York comedy is who the Bowery Boys play, who are always getting themselves into ridiculous situations. So he did 25 of those, but he did dramas, crime films, romance, kids, kid drama. He was very well known for working with kids, especially. This is one film we'll get into, Penrod and Sam. So, also Video Archives is turning into a William Beaudine retrospective for the whole month as well. And unlike the New Beverly, their entire calendar is William Beaudine, almost all double features. And the New Beverly has a sprinkling of other films throughout. But anyway, just to jump in, I mean, the other thing I think I want to touch on too is this Pure Cinema podcast. The joy of listening to Quentin Tarantino talk about movies is just so, for a cinephile, so intoxicating, both that this guy makes movies I love, but also he is just crazy in love with movies, and that they still interest him to this degree today. And, talking both about how many films he watches and, he has, he's written his book, Cinema Speculation, and he has talked about wanting to be a cinema historian, writer, critic in his later part of his life when he's done directing films. And you really, I don't know if I've ever seen it fully on display, as much as in the 4.5 hours that he does this podcast about William Beaudine. So to start, it's very hard to give some recs on this, both because I don't know the films. I'm relying heavily on what I listen to on the podcast and what sounds good. So I'll just throw a few out there at everyone. This is one of his more well-known movies from the 30s because it starred W.C. Fields, The Old-Fashioned Way and Misbehaving Ladies, also from the 30s, from 1931. So you're getting some kind of pre-code comedy, partly my favorite, and I love W.C. Fields, and I haven't seen this film, and so I think that for me is a great starting point, and that's on April 9th and 10th. And then jumping to, I mentioned Penrod and Sam. This is a silent film about children that in the podcast they go on for a good while to describe, but it's apparently just heart-wrenching, and they're going to premiere it with a live music score. And I feel like that one is potentially a really special, especially for people who maybe don't see silent films as much or a little put off. I think that one could be a real gateway for people. And then the last one is The Ape Man, Voodoo Man, and Bela Lugosi Meets a Brooklyn Gorilla, which all of these sound very, very in line with kind of the slapstick, over-the-top comedy of the era that he was perhaps, Tarantino is arguing he's perhaps one of the greats of sight gags and slapstick humor and getting the most out of comedic actors. And Tarantino goes on for a while about Bela Lugosi Meets a Brooklyn Gorilla in this, both because one of the actors is essentially doing a Jerry Lewis impression, and he thinks the impression is bar none and one of the great impression performances of all time. And so jumping then to video archives, the Micro Cinema and the Vista, they've broken down their schedule a little bit between, they have matinees Tuesday and Wednesday, and all of those are Bowery Boy films. And, anything from the early Ghosts on the Loose to Angel's Alley, Blues Busters. And the Bowery Boys is made up of Leo Gorcey, who, you can't really see here, but he's the very square face. He wears his hat with his rim pushed up, and then Huntz Hall is his sidekick. And so these two guys are really the leading men of the Bowery Boys. And, they get, I actually went and saw this one yesterday, April 1st. I didn't want to record on April Fool's Day, so I went and saw one of the first Bowery Boys double features because I'd never seen any before. And Angel's Alley, it's really interesting, is really quite melodramatic about, people being pulled into crime in New York, and this Catholic priest who's helping out the Italian community, trying to keep the kids away from the gangster. And there's a young boy who gets hit by this car, and it's like this really touching scene with him and Leo Gorcey, and kind of was a surprising start for me of what the Bowery Boys are. And then Smuggler's Cove, I think, is a lot more emblematic of what a typical Bowery Boys film is, with Leo and Huntz starting off as janitors working in a large Manhattan skyscraper. And there's a case of mistaken identity where Leo Gorcey thinks he has inherited this Long Island fancy house, and they go out to claim it, him and his boys, and there's some criminals who are using it as a smuggling cove from the ocean. And so then, picking out a couple others, there's the Friday night, April 17th double of Mr. Celebrity and Hot Rhythm. And I chose this one because Mr. Celebrity gets the longest kind of breakdown in the Pure Cinema podcast, where Tarantino and I should say Brian and Elric of the Pure Cinema podcast, they spend a long time breaking down Mr. Celebrity. So I do feel like I know the plot heavily, but it's a racehorsing movie about a racehorse veterinarian who ends up kind of taking care of his nephew and taking him on the road around racetracks. He goes from one racetrack to another, treating horses. And nephew's grandparents, who would prefer that, because he's from a very well-to-do family, would prefer that he come live with them. And it sounds fantastic. And so that's why I put that one on there. And then the Bowery Boys, Spookbusters and Ghost Chasers, just to get a sense of, there was a lot of comedy horror sort of subgenre within the Bowery Boys. And I think that's a really interesting one to pick out there, as well as, the other. So that's my Bowery Boys rec. And then the other rec that it sounds so interesting is Mr. Washington and Lucky Ghost. And this is because these are all black cast films. They were called race pictures in the day. These were both made in 1942, and they would go around the country playing, local black mom and pop theaters, owned theaters. And there was a few studios who saw the potential in that, and all the performers, and made these films. And Beaudine was one of the kind of highest thought of directors to step into this at the time. And Mr. Washington Goes to Town. I keep, thinking of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, but it's, a takeoff of that Mr. Washington Goes to Town, which is like a black Western. And so I think that one on Thursday evening, April 9th, is like a must for me. I'm really excited to see that. And so, yeah, I hope to check in, post or the end of the month, maybe do a Substack write-up about what I thought of all these Beaudine films. I'm hoping to see at least 10 films that are of the, multitude that are programmed. So I think it's going to be really very, very interesting to see if, the movie-going audience can see what Tarantino sees in this director and his films. And, before I forget, it's April. I wanted to push, we're started to print our Movietown Recs. If you haven't seen these, we've printed them as a zine, and they go top picks by theater. And just the way I'm doing now, give you the new Beverly Recs, video archives. We'll get into the Eastwood next, and it goes all the way through. And then it doubles them up and gives you them by date too, if you just want to look up a specific date for a rec. And it's got the back, you can make notes on what you've seen. And then the coolest thing, this thing folds out into a poster. And these are designed and printed by Sorella Studios, who helps Movietown and has designed all of our logos and so much of our work. And I'm just really excited about these, and they've been getting a great response. So, if you're out at a theater, check to see if they've got some on hand, because I'm taking them around to a bunch of theaters around town. So jumping back into the Recs, let's go to the Eastwood. And this one is I think for a lot of people who went to the Cinefamily era at the silent movie theater on Fairfax, this is one of those films that was a little bit almost of an initiation rite, or just one you would hear people talk about a lot as one of the best screenings. And that's the Hong Kong cult action movie, The Story of RIKI, with just crazy violent effects, and just will leave your jaw dropped at where this film goes. And so this is showing, the Hong Kong Cinema Club is showing this in the large theater at the Eastwood, and highly recommend checking this out with an audience. Those guys do such a great job of setting the stage for the film, and I think this will be a really fun one. And then also at the Eastwood, this is at the end of the month. I actually just went this past weekend. Matt's Mortuary, who is Matt, who runs the Video Archives Theater. If you've gone there, you've seen him, and he has started a series at the Eastwood called TV Terrors. And last week they showed Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, this just crazy nightmare-inducing, network TV movie from the 70s that if you watch it, it's got these like little creatures that are haunting this woman in this haunted house. They're like these little demons. And I mean, if I was to watch that as a child, I just can't believe you would just come across this. So I think many children like had serious nightmares from when that aired. And so he's airing another one. This is one I'd never heard of. It's a John Carpenter made for TV film from 1978. So this comes in between Assault on Precinct 13 and Halloween. Halloween actually premiered in theaters a few weeks after this showed on TV. And it's got a little bit of a Rear Window vibe that of a stalker in like a, you know, big city apartment buildings looking into another apartment and trying to, you know, solve that mystery horror. And so yeah, I definitely recommend checking out that new series. And so jumping to American Cinematheque, you know, this is a Noir City series they kind of have ongoing or do every year. And, you know, American Cinematheque plays a lot of noir, has a lot of noir series. And I just found this one really popped off. It felt a little different because both they're trying to do something a little bit different with it. They're taking noir films that have like either, you know, jazz as part of the milieu of the film, or musicians, or, you know, not just jazz. It kind of goes into blues and other musicians as a central part of the story. And what they're doing is they're going to have a live pianist in theater at the Egyptian who's going to be playing music as you come into the theater and in between these double features. So the ones I've highlighted there are Black Angel from 1946 and Blues in the Night are both being shown on 35. And then on April 11th, this is one of the great Elvis movies is showing, King Creole, directed by Michael Curtis. They're also showing another Michael Curtis film, Young Man with a Horn, starring Kirk Douglas. And so I think that is a really fantastic pairing of those two films. I mean, a great gateway for people who haven't seen or maybe a little reluctant to try an Elvis movie, King Creole. And then one playing on its own, a Robert Wise directed film, Odds Against Tomorrow from 1951. And this features Harry Belafonte in playing a musician. And so I think it's, you know, kind of, it makes the grade for that. And then so jumping to Gardena Cinema is doing something that I've kind of, you know, there's always a lot of celebrations of kind of looking back after actors and filmmakers pass away in memoriam, and or, you know, kind of looking years later, highlighting a birthday. And Gardena Cinema is having a Heath Ledger B-Day weekend, and they're showing A Knight's Tale on Friday and Saturday, April 3rd and 5th. And then an early Heath Ledger film, the Australian film Two Hands, that co-stars Brian Brown from the FX series. If you've seen any of those movies, are, you know, like great, and he's a great presence in those. And those are each, A Knight's Tale is being presented by VHS Spectacular, and Two Hands by Girl at the Cinema. And so I think those are very fun thematic there. And then going on to Brain Dead, I've got two screenings here, both on film. The first on 35, Erg, A Music War from 1981, director Derek Burbidge. And this is presented by Hollywood Entertainment on April 5th. And I didn't know this like concert music doc at all, but it's a performance forward doc. It features 30 performances in kind of like punk and early 80s, late 70s new wave, and sounds really like just a energetic, fun concert doc. And then they've got one of their 16 millimeter marathons, 6-film marathons that is being put on by Secret 16, also with Killer Movies and Museum of Home Video. And it's this very specific 16 millimeter films that are from the 1980s sword and sorcery genre. And I actually bought a ticket to this partly because I'm like, what are these films going to be? You know, I don't know if it's just going to be ones that I probably know, like Kroll or the Conan movies or Red Sonja, or if they're going to be much lower B grade even of those films. And also, I'm very interested to see, and also I'm seeing so many Beaudine films this month. It's to be seen if I make it out to this marathon. If you see me post a ticket giveaway on my Instagram stories, you'll know I didn't make it out, but I hope to, and can report back on that. Oh, at the UCLA Film and TV Archive at the Hammer Museum this month, like they have just a really interesting late 80s movie, Harlem Nights, the Eddie Murphy directed film, is showing on 35. And this was from 1989, post Coming to America. You know, Eddie Murphy, I just remember at the time, and what's been talked about afterwards, is he kind of cashed in his chips in to make this film off all of his early successes. And this is an all-black cast. It co-stars Richard Pryor. Red Fox has a big role. And I mean, I saw this movie so many times as a kid. It was one that I just watched over and over again on HBO, recorded it to a VHS tape when it played on TV. And so a lot of it is for me to see if it holds up, because it was definitely a maligned, not very well thought of film at the time, but I was young enough that didn't matter to me. And so I'm interested. I haven't seen it since certainly the 90s. So I'll be very interested to check it out. And that's towards the end of the month, April 26th. And of course, free. All the screenings at UCLA Film TV Archive are free. So then jumping to Whammy, Whammy's got two nights I'm highlighting here. The first is actually presented by Pure Cinema Podcast, and Brian from the podcast is going to be there presenting these two 1990s era documentary, kind of East Coast like on the ground documentaries. The first called Wildwood, New York, which, you know, I've read about it recently because it got a restoration, and it's partly known as like Lana Del Rey's favorite film, but it sounds fantastic. And then Girls at the Carnival very much sounds like a heavy metal parking lot doc for, kind of a small town street block carnival. And then the other one, presented by O Canada and Seventh House, is the animated rock and roll movie called Rock and Rule. It's kind of like sci-fi fantasy, but with like a crazy rock soundtrack. And then jumping to the Vista, there's a midnight film and then one of their weekend matinees that I love to highlight. So their midnight, I'm highlighting Car Wash, the Richard Pryor, George Carlin comedy from 1976, and Libeled Lady from 1936. And that's on both of those on 35. And then, jumping down to the Art Theater of Long Beach, they're showing Citizen Kane, April 11th and 12th as part of their classic film series. And, Citizen Kane plays a lot around town, but I wanted to throw it in just in case people are watching who haven't seen it or have never seen it in a theater. Is a great way to take it in. And then there's a 420 this month, April 20th. And so they're, of course, doing it up at the Art Theater of Long Beach with See It on 16 millimeter, presenting Cheech and Chong's Up in Smoke, which sounds like a great way to spend 420. And then jumping over to Santa Ana and the Frida, they're spotlighting John Waters this month, and I have a few double features of his films. I highlighted one of his earlier films from 1970, Multiple Maniacs, and Pink Flamingos, of course, from 1972. And then April 17th through 19th. This is showing 3 times. And this is part of they're doing kind of a week-long 420 film series. And so this one is the Greg Araki film Smiley Face from 2007, starring Anna Faris. And I love this movie. It's one of my favorite Greg Araki movies. And I've recently revisited a lot of his older films because Criterion put out the 4K of the Apocalypse trilogy. That's fantastic. And this film feels less attached to that style than even where he went back with Kaboom and other films. And Anna Faris, I just think, is such a great comedic performer, especially in this era. This and House Bunny are 2 of my favorite, kind of 21st century comedy performances. And then I'm highlighting another classic film in their series on April 22nd, Angels with Dirty Faces, the James Cagney film from 1938, director Michael Curtis. And the reason I really wanted to feature this both was because this was one of the first like classic Hollywood movies I was intentionally introduced to. My dad was at it when I was getting into movies, really pushed this title on me, and it's great. And he pushed it on me because it features many of the actors who would go on to be in the Bowery Boys. It features them as the Dead End Kids. So this is one of their first films, and they play these, New York City Bowery kids who look up to James Cagney, this gangster in the neighborhood. And it's about that relationship, James Cagney's relationship with the kids and whether they aspire to be like him or not. And so then moving on to the Culver Theater, the Hellraisers Film and Social Club is presenting Killer Clowns from Outer Space, the 1988 film. And I love to highlight this one because last year I had such a great episode, a road trip episode of the Texas Theater, and did a long interview with Herod Blank, Les Blank's son, who, also is an actor and director, and he's in Killer Clowns from Outer Space. He plays many of the killer clowns. And so he goes to like horror conventions and stuff around the country now for killer clowns. And so I just love that. And then also, to tie this in with my other choice of the Culver City at the Culver Theater is The Right Stuff, the astronaut film from Philip Kaufman from 1983 about the first group of astronauts being trained for the Apollo missions. And I mean, I loved this movie as a kid. It was one of those double VHS, like long, like 3-hour something long films. And I don't know if it's because of Project Hail Mary that they're showing it, but I think it's a really interesting pairing with that film out now and kind of on the minds of many folk. And so then jumping to the Philosophical Research Society and Seventh Houses screenings there. They have a whole series, or not a whole series, but a few films related to John Lilly, the scientist who was really kind of at the forefront of LSD testing in the 50s and 60s. And he also believed that dolphins were this like higher intelligence that could be communicated with through LSD. So they have some films inspired by him. And one of them is Altered States, which is about a scientist at a university going on acid trips and it going to very dark places. And then they're also having a series in April and May called Out There, which is a lot of like science fiction, space themed animation and films. And these are 2 of, they have a double feature of René Lalau's films, Time Masters and Fantastic Planet. And then this one, I think is one of the really great screenings on the calendar, all month is April 25th at PRS. They're showing experimental filmmaker Harry Smith's Early Abstractions collection, but with a live score by Devendra Barnhart and friends. And so I think that's a really, cool pairing and something that doesn't come along that often. At Old Town Music Hall this month, I'm featuring the really classic silent film Wings, directed by William Wellman, of course, with live accompaniment on the Mighty Wurlitzer. At Now Instant Image Hall, they're showing a classic Hollywood film from the 50s, The Bigamist, by director Ida Lupino. And Ida Lupino, she also stars in the film, but was really one of the first female directors to, make studio films and keep getting some assignments. And I think I don't know that film, and it sounds great. And then so at 2220 Arts and Archives this month, Acropolis Cinema is doing a series on the Greek director Athena Rachel Sangari. And one of the films they're showing is The Slow Business of Going. And so I think, just checking out, I don't know her film, so I love the idea of, popping in for one of those to see what is drawing Acropolis Cinema's attention to bringing those out. And then at Dynasty Typewriter, this is, they do some, it's more of a comedy venue, both stand-up, sketch comedy, improv, really great venue right by MacArthur Park. And they do some film screenings, and Doug Benson, the comedian and podcaster, has a long-running series called The Benson Movie Interruption. And I finally was able to check it out in February, and the conceit is really cool. So he has a panel of like 3 comedian guests that he brings out to feature in the front row, kind of mystery style theater 3000, and a movie's played, and they do live commentary during the film. But another, key component of it is the movie is chosen by audience members bring in DVDs and Blu-rays that they want to see the panel do the commentary on. And so, I brought a film in, it wasn't selected. It was the Lindsay Lohan crazy movie from the 2000s, I Know Who Killed Me. I heard it, actually somebody brought that in March and it played there. Doug Benson said that on a recent post when I was highlighting his movie interruption for April. And so then the panel and the crowd, kind of goes through a process of choosing the film, but everybody gets to stand up and say a little bit about their film and give a little pitch on why it would be good to screen with everybody. And so I think that's a really unique experience. And then lastly, highlighting some entries at Vidiots this month, Gaspar Noé's Enter the Void is showing. I haven't seen this theatrically since it came out. And, just floored me at the time. And I would, it's one of those ones that I feel like it is such a theatrical experience. I really would encourage anybody, if you've seen it at home or haven't seen it at all, to go see it. And that's presented by Synth History. It has an incredible synth score, I'm sure, that they're highlighting. And so that's really cool. And then sort of another film that they're showing that's related to, my Texas theater road trip last year, they're showing A Poem is a Naked Person. And this is the movie that showed the restoration, the Criterion restoration at the Texas Theater. Herod Blank was presenting it. His father's, what his father considered his masterpiece, the 1974 film centered on the musician and producer Leon Russell in Oklahoma as he set up this studio kind of in the sticks of Oklahoma. And then lastly, Vidiots is getting in on 420 with a physical media mind melters session that I'm sure is going to be some wild stuff. And so that's April. I hope to see you out there. If you're at the New Beverly or Video Archives, say hello. And I'd love to hear what you're thinking of the William Beaudine retrospective. And until then, thank you.